Hey guys, Kristen here with MACkite, and today I wanted to cover the North Atmos versus the Astra board. So if you've been looking at North boards, you might have heard of or you might be familiar with the Atmos. It's their big air free ride board and it's pretty popular. It's a little bit stiffer, so it really allows you to cut through the chop and really hold down the edge you need to have explosive pop off the water, which is what you want for big air and to get the height you want for those kite loops. Now the Astra is also a big air free ride board. So with that, who is the Astra for? The Astra is geared more towards their lightweight and smaller riders, kind of like myself. I had the opportunity to ride these boards back to back, and one of the things I noticed was the narrower stance with the Astra. So the Astra for the smaller riders allows for a little bit more comfortable stance versus if you have an Atmos, you might have like a slightly wider stance. And also with the Astra, they come in smaller sizes. So I think the largest size for the Astra is a 138. So now what about the actual differences and how do they feel riding them back to back? So I was on the same size kite in the same conditions at the same spot, and I started on the Atmos, I switched to the Astra, and then I switched back to the Atmos just to get a very direct comparison and feel for the two in the same conditions. So the Astra has some more flex to it. It's a little bit more of a fun and playful board. And where the advantage really comes in for the smaller riders is you have a little bit more control over the board with it being slightly more flexy. It still has enough stiffness to it that you can still get good explosive load and pop off the water, and you can still get the height you need for big air. But for a smaller rider, you don't need quite a big board. So if you're riding in higher winds and you're a smaller rider, you want a board that you can have more control over, really hold your edge down. A big advantage with the Astra is that with the flex, it allows for softer landing. And because the Astra has a little bit more flex, I noticed that those landings were more soft on the Astra versus the Atmos. The Atmos, when you land, can sometimes be more of a smack on the water. The Astra, I felt like the landings were easier on my knees, easier on the joint. Another great thing about a more flexy board is that it'll be more fun to ride in the chop. I've ridden really stiff boards in chop before, and I've ridden more rockered boards and also more flexy boards. And the thing with the Astra being a little bit more flexy, it allows you to absorb some of that chop more so than the Atmos. The Atmos is more stiff, which is great for big air, but when you're riding in chopping conditions, you don't want a super stiff board that's you're gonna feel every piece of chop, you're gonna feel like it's kind of throwing you around. The Astra allows you to be more playful in chop and still get that pop off the water that you want in those kind of conditions. Regardless, both boards were really good at holding their edge, and that's a really important thing for a big air board. So I would say back to back, the Atmos is a little bit more stiff, but I don't feel like I lost any of that pop when I switched to the Astra. The biggest difference between the two is the competitive edge, so anybody who's looking just for that little extra 5%. So riding the two boards back to back and doing the same tricks in the same conditions, they essentially felt the same. The only big thing I really felt was the flex in the Astra and then the narrower stance. So if you like a little bit more of a narrow stance, I would highly recommend going with the Astra versus the Atmos. One other thing I did notice between the two is that with the Atmos, it did allow me to get a little bit more speed. So that comes back to that extra 5% that I was talking about, where I was riding in really light winds, and I felt like when I was on the Atmos, I had a little bit more speed, and I felt like I could get a little bit more height off the water. The Astra, with it being a little bit more flexy and with having those lighter wind conditions, I didn't quite feel like I had quite as much speed as I did on the Atmos. So that little bit of extra speed is what gives you that extra 5% and what makes the difference with big air and getting that extra height. You want the speed to create the energy and then the stiffness to translate that energy. So I think if you're a bigger rider or you're riding in lighter conditions, you might want to go for the Atmos. I think if you're a lighter rider and you tend to ride in stronger winds, which normally if you're doing big air, you want strong winds anyway, you could really benefit from having a board like the Astra. you'll be able to control it more, and you'll have better, softer landings without losing any of the height or the edge control that you need for big air or kite loops. Hopefully they gave you some insight in the difference between the two boards and helps you decide which board you want to go for. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.